is an HR and systems strategist consultant, and she helps established business owners and HR teams create systems that optimize and uplevel their business for growth and expansion. Otisa has worked in the human resources for 6 years. She has been creating systems for former employers and clients for a total of 7 years. She enjoys planning and executing employee engagement activities for her former employers and clients. Welcome to the show, Otisa. I'm super excited to have this conversation.
I am so happy to be here, Alisha. It's great to be here with you.
Yay! So we're going to start off with, how do you help companies and the HR teams?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. There's a lot of different ways that I help business owners and HR teams. Sometimes it's literally just having a strategy and a game plan for where they are currently and where they're trying to take their business or organization. And a lot of the times they come to me and they haven't really sat down and thought about that. They usually come to me for a one-off problem, like, hey, I need a hire, or hey, this job descriptions are not really aligned. Can you help us audit them? And then I go, well, hey, where do you see this org or this business growing in the next 5 years? And they're like, what? And so a lot of the times I'm sitting down and I'm either helping them create a strategy that is aligned with the goals that they're trying to achieve. And it doesn't have to just be staffing, right? It could just be like, here's our goals. We want to reach X amount of revenue in 5 years. Okay, well, that directly impacts your payroll. That directly impacts how you're investing in your team, and other, resources that you're going to need to be able to operate a business of that type of growth, right? So that's usually how I help folks. But with HR teams, it's a little different. I joke with one of my clients that it's HR therapy.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, because a lot of the times, HR directors or people operation officers, they don't really have anyone to go to. They're usually trying to manage, the needs of the employees and the needs of the employer. But yet, who manages their needs, right? A lot of the time they're coming to me and they're like, hey, here's a situation. Can you help me navigate it? Or, hey, I'm having a really tough time this week. Can we just sit here and talk about this tough time? And maybe sometimes I'm asking them, like, how are you taking care of yourself? What can you do to prepare for this stressful meeting that you're going to go into? Or, hey, this week is going to be very stressful because of XYZ. What are some things you can do and practices to take care of yourself during this time? So that's usually how I'm helping HR teams as well.
So I got a question. What's their answer typically when you ask that?
Ooh, when I asked about like how they're taking care of themselves?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. Like some folks, they just don't think about that. They're so used to putting everyone else's needs above their own. Yeah. So usually we're coming up with ideas. So sometimes I'll say, hey, like for me personally, I like to ground myself before meeting with a stressful client or meeting with or having a stressful meeting. And I just like to practice grounding, and I'll ask like, hey, what is that? How does that look like for you? And we'll just kind of talk through what that could look. That could be a walk. It could be listening to your favorite music. One client has a hammock. So I say, well, maybe you can pop in that hammock a little bit before your meeting. So sometimes it's just brainstorming about what that can look like. I don't expect everyone to love meditation and yoga. Like that doesn't have to be something that you do, but there needs to be something that's yours that you can easily do if you work remotely, or something that you can take a break doing when you're actually in the workplace.
Yeah. So Plantly is obviously a wellness company, and it's funny. We always talk about the wellness of the workforce and how they want to implement that and how they want to take care of their employees and everyone else. But when that question comes up, like, well, how do you take care of yourself? They don't know how to answer that. And it's like kind of being like the mom of the organization, because moms do it too. We just take care of everybody else, and then we're just like, either we don't have time or we just have forgotten how to do it, just because it's a stressful environment.
You're absolutely correct. And it's funny, when I used to be an HR manager, I used to tell folks that it's honestly babysitting adults. It's like, because you're running around making sure that they have what they need. You're checking to see if they've taken a lunch or a break, but yet no one is asking you, have you taken a lunch? Have you taken a break? It's so spot on.
So how did you get into this? I know you've been in HR for a little bit. So how did the transition happen?
Well, it's a story. So I would say I moved to Colorado about 8 years ago, and I graduated college And I was just trying to explore like what the next step is, what career path. I thought I wanted to be in events and do event coordinating and planning. And so I started working like in front desk jobs where there was some event planning and coordinating. And that was fun. And then there was a catering company that was hiring for an event coordinator. I applied, and then the manager was like, well, actually, we could use you in operations and front desk and help with sales. And I was like, okay. And then over time, like I think I spent like almost 6 months there, and their establishment manager decided to part ways. And they were like, okay, well, we need someone to handle HR. I was already handling a lot of those tasks like payroll, checking time sheets, interview, correspondence and coordinating. And so they were like, well, hey, would you want to just help us with our HR? And I was like, sure. And I literally had to do everything from scratch. There was no onboarding process. There was no handbook. We switched payroll companies. Like it was just thrown in. There was, and I'm just grateful that my degree was around organizational communication. So a lot of the things, like I was talking to a friend yesterday about, like, she was like, well, who uses their college degree? And I was like, I do. All that stuff was relevant because a lot of
actually me.
But I did that on purpose. I knew that this would be a very broad major, but I knew that it would be applied to something. So I get to use a lot of things that I learned then. So anyway, I started helping them getting things off the ground. And then 5 years later of working for them, as you know, HR is draining. It can be very draining and exhausting. And I was in the catering, food and beverage world. So it's very high energy, a lot of moving parts. You're hiring for multiple jobs simultaneously. And it's also seasonal at the same time. So it was just a lot that I wasn't prepared for. And during that time, there's moments where you're kind of, I would say from December to March is a strange time. So usually it's like, okay, well, the season's over, go find some things to do. And that included me. And I was like, what? I'm HR. So I had to start figuring out what to do to have that income coming in. And so a friend was like, hey, you could do what you do for this company. You could do that for other small businesses. And I was like, what? So then I started experimenting and talking to different business owners that were at that part in their in the stage of their business where they're ready to hire, but they could be nervous, they could be scared to outsource, or they're just not organized to create that onboarding process or a hiring process in general. That's
a very intimidating process.
It was, I will say, with those clients that I started out with, it was just interesting listening to all the fears that they had with, oh gosh, I do need help, but am I ready to release some of these tasks? Am I ready to?
Yes, that's a big one.
It was, and it was also kind of funny because I'm like, well, how about you practice with me and let me do some of these things, so you can understand that it's not as scary as you think. It's just the hardest part is finding aligned candidates that can grow with you. That's what's I think the hardest part. So that's when I started a business, and I had a few clients, and I was able to work part-time at the catering company as an HR manager. And that was 2019. And then 2020 hit and I was not prepared for, I don't think the world was prepared for that time.
Anybody was really prepared for that.
No, nobody was. And so I always tell folks that I allowed myself a week of mourning. And I got laid off. We all got laid off in the food and bev world. And so I just started learning more about business, learning more about what I wanted to do. And a few friends and clients were like, hey, there's this nonprofit that needs some support onboarding. Can you help them? And then that's where everything grew. And I really started working with nonprofits and small businesses. And it's just been amazing since then.
I love it. I love how just two multiple unexpected things happened, and then it turned into this beautiful thing at the end. So
yes.
That's typically how it happens. Just in HR in general, that's typically how it happens every time. Because I talk to a lot of HR professionals, and they always say, the majority of them say, I just fell into it. This is not something that I woke up and I want to be an HR professional. I don't think half of us ever think that. We're just this might be cool. And then when you're in it, you're like, oh my God.
That is so true. And it's funny, I met someone who has an accounting and bookkeeping business, and she was just like, I actually was going to college or going to school to get my degree in HR. And I was like, what?
You wanted to do that?
So they're out there.
But all jokes Yeah, all jokes aside, it's a very fulfilling role. It's very stressful. I was actually just talking to my brother a couple weeks ago. I'm the oldest out of everybody, and he made a career change, and he went from operations to sales, and then he's like, I think I want to go into HR, and I'm like, are you sure? I told him like all like the things that he would be dealing with. He's a very work-life balance guy, and I'm like, that's not gonna happen probably in the first like year or two, and maybe just not in a while. You're gonna have to force yourself to do it. He took the jump, and he loves where he's at now. But we'll see how that goes. But it's a very fulfilling role, and much needed. It's just there's a lot of components to it. So when you speak about working with business owners and HR teams and them not kind of like flinching at the what are your 5-year goals, do you find that starts at the head, or is it just like everybody? Because I would think it actually starts at the head with the executives, and then the teams really not knowing what that goal is. Do you find that that's the case?
I do find that's the case. And I would say with your small businesses and your nonprofits, I think that's a theme. And I also think that I always tell folks that it's important to share those goals with your staff, because they want to know what they're working towards, and if maybe they can be part of that growth plan.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I was talking to a client yesterday about direction and sharing the direction of where this org is heading. And I said, I don't think that the staff feel that you're keeping information from them, but they don't know where we're going. Therefore, they don't know how they can be part of it, that can be hard from a motivation standpoint. About where your place is in the organization and where you can go. Because we all want to grow, we all want to move up, we all want to learn new skills, and I think that sometimes executives and leadership forget that. They're so focused on executing, they're so focusing on all the behind the scenes components, but I think there's that disconnect of, we have to remind our staff of where we're headed, and hey, they're going to help us get there. So if we share then this process can be even better than we could imagine. And there's things that they can bring to the table that you probably weren't even thinking about,
you can find some hidden gems in your workforce. It's like, wait, you know how to do that? Wait, you want to do this? Like, we don't have to go outside and find someone to do it. You can just make that switch. No, that's awesome. So how do you strategize with companies?
I like to work backwards. So sometimes it'll be depending on how they're coming to me, because like I said, some folks, they come to me with an urgent request, and then I remind them that actually this is where we're going to start. So when it comes to just building that strategy, I like to work backwards, and I also like to create a priority list. So I'll have them map out what they think the priorities are. And then we'll kind of take it backwards from, where do you see this organization or this business in the next 5 years? 10 years freaks people out, so I stopped doing that.
So that's a long, it's
a very long period of time. Yeah. So I stick to 3 to 5, depending on how small or how large the organization is, and we'll take it from there. So we'll say, where do you see this being? And dream, vision. Let's vision this out. Let's map this out. Where do you see the operations being on the behind the scenes? What's happening client facing? Well, let's just go big. Right. And then, how do we make that happen from where we are today? And then we start laying down those pieces, those layers to get there, depending on what the goals actually are.
Okay. So my next question is, how do they respond to that? Like you lay out a roadmap.
Yeah. Some folks, they really do like it. A lot of the times they're just like, oh, I never thought about it that way, because usually when we create goals, we're usually in the 1 to 2 year place. Yeah. And that's safe and comfortable. And I agree. But when you are creating this roadmap, you have to know where you're headed. If you don't know where you're headed, then the things that you're doing in the present, they may not really get you far. They may just be putting a Band-Aid on some of the things that are actually happening, that are causing pain or causing issues. So some folks, they love it, they get really excited, and some folks get really overwhelmed. And I'll even
see that,
get really, like I had a nonprofit where we did a retreat and I created like a game. I made it a game with instructions and things. And when we got to the actual goals, it was very difficult because they were like, well, all these are important. And I'm like, oh, they all are. However, you got to start with one or two of them first. And also like look and say, hey, these goals are actually really important for the next 3 years in order to get to the things that we want to do in the 5 years. It doesn't mean that one is more important than the other. And that was really eye-opening for them. And I told them, I was like, this is not a stop and start conversation. This is going to be ongoing. You should be revisiting this goal, roadmap, whatever you want to call the strategy, at least twice a year, be looking at it and saying, hey, where are we? You know what I mean? Like you should be reviewing this, and the leadership should also be looking at this on a monthly, quarterly basis to see if all these moving parts are aligned with this roadmap. And if you're not aligned with that, okay, what needs to change? What adjustments and tweaks need to be made? That's the only way those things are going to actually happen or come to fruition, right?
Yeah, because these are actually kind of like business forecasting. So you need to make sure you're on the right track, and everybody else is too. So, and what better way to do it than make sure everybody in the organization is included in that and on the same page.
Yes, I completely agree.
So what are I know you say you work with companies and you have like more urgent tasks that they come to you with. What's the top thing that organizations want to change?
Ooh, that's a hard one, because I will say, I think the disconnect that I see is they usually think that they need to revamp all of the things at the same time. So they think that they need to revamp their handbook, their job descriptions, their processes, but they're not looking at an inclusive culture. Does that make sense?
That's pretty important.
They're not looking at their employee resources available. They're not looking at having, so that's why I laugh, because I've had folks like, we need to revamp our handbook, and I'm like, tell me why you think you need that. And they'll give me some answer, and I'll say, I'm curious in why your staff is upset about that policy. Have you talked to them about that? And they're like, no. Okay. So
that's another big issue, is that these organizations are not talking to employees. They're not getting their feedback, especially when it comes to health and wellness, benefits that they're implementing. They're wondering why they're not getting the participation that they thought that they would get, because they thought it was the most greatest idea. But it's like, did you ask them if they wanted that? And they're like, no. Well, that might be something you need to change.
Yes. And I was just talking with someone yesterday about employee engagement. And I said, there was this debacle of, well, how many folks said this thing? I said, well, that doesn't matter. What matters is you should be asking your staff what they would like to see when it comes to employee engagement.
Well, that's awesome. I will go ahead and close out this podcast. Otisa, it was great chatting with you. I love the candidness of our conversation. I'm pretty sure our audience did as well. For our audience, we love all of your feedback and your comments. Please like, share, subscribe, whatever platform you are listening to this on. We are excited to be here. And until next time, we'll see you guys later. Bye.
Bye.